views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Open, the one and only show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world right to you. I'm your host, Daren, Jaime, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough, as well as across New York City. Coming up on today's show, we go front and center discussing a recent research on a treatment strategy to possibly cure HIV. And then afterwards, we'll learn how Safe Horizon is helping survivors of domestic violence. Then a little later on in the show, we'll talk about a recent case of Legionnaire's disease and how a person can take legal action. Also, we'll discuss how vaccine hesitancy is affecting New Yorkers. We'll have more details a little bit later on. And then also we'll learn about a magnesium deficiency and how you can get more magnesium into your daily diet. And then finally, we'll discuss a not-for-profit that's working to create a dynamic, inclusive NYC, advancing economic mobility for all young adults and their communities. So we invite you to stay tuned because all this and much more is heading your way. Right now, we're officially open. And hello, everyone. I'm Daren, Jaime, and welcome to Open. Today is Wednesday, November the 3rd, and you're watching Open, a live and interactive program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to your TV sets. We also want to welcome our viewers on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, as Open is being broadcast live simultaneously on the MNN channel. We also encourage you to stay connected to us on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV, and of course, our website at bronxnet.org. Well, a lot has been going on across New York City. Can't take you through everything, but we can take you through a couple of things with our Bronx updates. We start off with community news. Phipps Neighborhoods and Food Stream Network launch is helping to combat food insecurity and get fresh food to Bronxites. Our BronxNet reporter, Darissa White, brings us the details.
A partnership between two nonprofits, Phipps Neighborhood and Food Stream Network, is helping combat food insecurity by getting fresh food on Bronxites' tables.
So today, Food Stream Network and Phipps Neighborhoods have partnered to provide healthy, cultural, relevant, fresh farm produce from local BIPOC farmers into the community here in CD6.
Cummings says the Bronx-based initiative kicked off after the height of the pandemic, when so many Bronxites found themselves out of work and food insecure.
There was such a systemic problem about not being able to access affordable, fresh produce in some of our most vulnerable neighborhoods.
All the produce from the farmers market is free of charge. The organization locates areas where produce is in a surplus, and they relocate it to communities of need in the Bronx. Nicole Carter with Phipps Neighborhood says each community loves the pop-up farmers market initiative. She says they locate areas that are considered food deserts in the Bronx and set up shop.
This is something that's very needed in this community due to there's a lot of food deserts and not enough healthy choices for tenants to receive out of Phipps neighborhoods. So this was the opportunity that the tenants truly loved. They asked that we can continue to do things of this sort.
The goal for Phipps Neighborhoods is to continue to produce farmers markets across the Bronx. They say they're hoping to receive more funding or more donated produce to continue those efforts. Reporting for BronxNet, Darissa White.
And that is all the time we have for our Bronx updates. We want you to stay with us, though, because we got more Open. It continues coming up right after this. And welcome back. In recent news, Einstein research demonstrated the successful suppression of HIV infections in mice. The scientists developed and used a novel synthetic protein to boost the immune response, and the technology is being studied for head and neck cancers, type 1 diabetes, and other autoimmune diseases that could possibly offer a path to a functional cure for HIV and other chronic viral infections. Joining us and sharing more details is the director of the Einstein Macromolecular Therapeutics Development Facility and chair of biochemistry at Einstein, Stephen Almo, and Charles Michael, chair in autoimmune diseases at Einstein and director of Einstein-Rockefeller-CUNY Center for AIDS Research, Harris Goldstein. And both of you, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess, I want to talk a little bit about this treatment strategy that's actually used to possibly cure HIV. It looks like a great breakthrough here.
Right. Well, I think that really have to think in terms of how you conduct the immune response. And our body really does a pretty good job of developing an immune response that in most cases is able to very effectively control infection. However, HIV is one infection, unfortunately, that our body can control, but it can't eradicate. And part of that is that the HIV distracts the immune system into targeting a response against areas of HIV that it could readily mutate and thus evade the immune response. And what this product, this Syntac, that Dr. Almo and his group have developed that we now are applying to HIV allows us to do is really potentially give to patients and focus their immune response against the Achilles heel of HIV. And that really is to us the breakthrough. Now, in terms of curing HIV, I think it's unlikely that we're ever gonna, and it's unlikely right now that we can eliminate every last HIV virus in individuals that are infected. However, if we could teach their immune system to suppress HIV infection so that as soon as it emerges, kind of like a sprinkler system immediately puts out a fire, then we could potentially provide what we call a functional cure. Namely, their immune system is controlling the infection the same way the drugs right now can control the infection, but the patients don't have to take drugs.
Yeah. And so, Dr. Almo, a little bit more about this novel synthetic protein that's called Syntac. Talk to us about your work and how it works.
Right. So I would start with a simple explanation. Everybody's had a blood test taken. And when you have a drop of blood, it's red because you've got red blood cells. A very small fraction of those cells are actually immune cells. And those are really the gatekeepers of health. They fight against autoimmune disease, infectious disease, malignancies. And those cells specifically recognize unique features on the diseased cell tissue, either an infected cell or malignant cell. And that address that they recognize, if you will, allows them to deliver various signals that they can either eliminate those cancerous cells or cause other cell types to expand and enhance. So what we've tried to do with our Syntac technology, these proteins we've made synthetically, is to mimic that process. We really, on our proteins, we've taken features that are present in these immune cells, encoded them in our proteins so that we can specifically deliver to those immune cells activating signals. And in this case, that activating signal specifically turns on immune cells that are encoded to go after and hopefully delete and kill HIV viral infected cells. So it's really like a mail delivery process. There's the address, the contents of the envelope, if you will, and then the delivery process itself.
So share with me a little bit more, because I'm interested in knowing how this actually works between the mice and the humans, because there's a correlation right there. So can you make it a little bit more plain for our viewers?
Right. So despite the fact we look somewhat different from mice, we also have a lot of commonalities, shared features in our immune response. And what we were able to do was generate molecules that work both on human immune cells as well as mouse immune cells. But what Harris has done, and I think what I'll let him describe in a little more detail, he's developed what he calls a humanized mouse system that allows us to study human cells in a living organism that is the surrogate mouse. So Harris?
Right, so it raises a really important point, namely what works in mice may or may not work in humans, clearly. So in order to overcome that, what we have done is that we have developed a a humanized mouse model where we basically take these white blood cells that Dr. Almo discussed coming from a patient, and in fact, coming from an HIV infected patient, we inject them into mice that really have no functioning immune system. Because these mice don't have functioning immune system, they will not reject the human cells, and the human cells will continue to proliferate and act inside the mouse. And because it's coming from an HIV infected individual, then HIV, because the mice are not on any medication, can now come out and start infecting cells and developing a very significant HIV infection. This now allows us to treat these mice with these syntax to see if we can now amplify and expand the very focused immune response that T cells can give to control and eliminate HIV infected cells. Can we suppress that infection? And in fact, in this paper, we demonstrated that we can. So in essence, we've shown it in actual human cells taken from an HIV infected patient, which really makes us optimistic that this may actually work when we give it to patients.
So we hear a little bit about antiretroviral therapy. How does this protein actually compare to antiretroviral therapy?
So antiretroviral therapy is very effective in patients, but patients need to take it constantly. Every day they need to take it. If they stop taking the medication, then the HIV that's been basically lying quiescent, silent in the body, reemerges because it no longer is being suppressed by the medication, and the patient now will have a full disseminated spread infection of HIV. What this particular syntax does is it basically expands an immune response that could potentially control and eliminate HIV infected cells as they emerge. So it's basically give the medication, expand the patient's immune system, and then from there, the patient's immune system takes over, and the patients no longer would need to take medication every day.
That's
I
awesome.
would just add to that, so they will stay around and remember what their job is, supposed to target and eliminate these HIV-infected T cells. So this is something that the retroviral therapy does not have, hence you have to take those small molecule drugs every day. Once you establish this immune sort of protection, it can last for a very long time.
You know, and I would compare this mechanism to how a vaccine works. So in essence, you vaccinate a patient, you now expand the immune response that's able now to control or prevent infection. The advantage of the syntax over a classic vaccine is where a classic vaccine will activate a wide array of immune cells, many of which in the almost overwhelming majority cannot control HIV infection. Because we know what kind of cells can control HIV infection, we could focally expand those specific cells and now enable them to control the infection. So the patient's own immune system now is able to take over and control the infection and take over the job that the antiretroviral therapy was doing beforehand.
And before I let you go, is there a timetable between the time of discovery and the possibility of actual treatment?
So I would say that's very hard to judge. If I had to guess, I would say it's really in the 5 or longer year timescale, because again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We've done some very elegant basic science work. We now need to try to translate into the clinic. The one thing working in our favor, though, is that somewhat different versions of our syntax drugs are already in clinical trials for treating head and neck cancer. So they've already been in upwards of 50 patients and have a very good toxicity profile, meaning that they're really relatively benign after application. And these, like I said, are in clinical trials for head and neck cancer in a number of settings. So that's really going to boost or shorten the time scale, I should say, for which we might be able to achieve a clinical outcome. I should also add that these clinical trials are in collaboration with Q Biopharma, of which I'm a founding founder. And Harris and I have both previously received research funds for a different project from Q for full transparency.
Certainly a lot of information there we will continue to follow. Thank you so much to Dr. Stephen Almo and then also Dr. Harris Goldstein for being with us here on Open. Now, if you want more information, we encourage you, visit the website at einsteinmed.edu and then also follow them on Twitter and Instagram at EinsteinMed. We do have more shows, so we encourage you, don't go anywhere. Open continues coming up right after this. welcome back. Safe Horizons is the largest not-for-profit victim service agency touching the lives of more than 250,000 people, including children, adults, and families that are affected by crime and abuse throughout New York City each year. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it increased the need for public awareness about the critical role victim service agencies serve for survivors, providing them with immediate resources to remain safe, including shelter placement, safety planning, and assistance with obtaining orders of protection. Joining me now to share a little bit more details is the Director of Legal Services in the Domestic Violence Law Project at Safe Horizon, Christine Perumal, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Daren. Thank you so much for having me. So like you said, Safe Horizon is the largest victim services agency. We've been serving survivors for over 40 years now. And we've really, during this pandemic especially, want survivors to know that they have a place to turn to, that Safe Horizon is here for help, that they are not alone. We serve survivors of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, youth homelessness, and immigrant survivors of crime. So we cover a broad array of services at our agency.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit about COVID-19. We talked about COVID-19 and really the effects. Are you seeing that there are more and more cases given the fact that so many people are staying at home?
So that's interesting. So we know that domestic violence is a pandemic in itself. And so there's another layer with COVID-19. So we have like a pandemic within a pandemic. And what we've been seeing is that, at the height of the pandemic, survivors were sheltering in place with their abusers. We weren't seeing a big increase in numbers with survivors reaching out to us. Our numbers slightly increased around June of 2020, and we've kind of leveled off since then. But what we've been seeing is how technology has played a role in the way we serve survivors during this pandemic. Like you said in the beginning, we've been serving survivors remotely with filing orders of protection in my program and the family court programs throughout New York City that Safe Horizon has. So the digital platform has increased our reach to survivors, which has been interesting.
So when we talk about domestic violence, it's a real wide array of things that occur. But for somebody who may be not familiar with signs, walk us through a little bit about the signs of domestic violence.
Sure. So there are signs of domestic violence, or some may like to say red flags. And these are things that family members, friends can pay attention to. Sometimes signs may include extreme jealousy by the abuser, verbal abuse, putting down a survivor in front of family and friends, controlling finances, even cruelty to animals is something that we see in a lot of our cases in court. Accusations to the survivor, believing that the survivor may be involved in other relationships or having affairs, things like that are red flags and signs to look out for.
And so when we look right now and you have a family member that's watching and saying, listen, I may know somebody, we all do have people in our circle, whether it's work, whether it's at home, or whether even at school, that we sometimes have questions and doubts about. How do we get that help? And what is the way that we can do that to be able to advocate for somebody that actually just may be a victim?
Right. So that's not always an easy conversation to broach. So I would encourage anyone who may want to help a survivor, family, friend, anyone going through that issue, call our hotline, get information from Safe Horizon that you can pass along to equip your family member or friend. If you're not comfortable having that conversation, making sure that you pass on these resources in a safe way to survivors can go a long way.
Yeah. And would you mind sharing a little bit more with our viewers about the Domestic Violence Law Project?
Sure. So the Domestic Violence Law Project is a legal program. We are a staff of attorneys and paralegals who assist survivors throughout New York City, all 5 boroughs, with free legal advice and or representation in family court. And the cases that we take on include orders of protection, child support, child custody, divorces, all in the family courts and Supreme Courts throughout New York City.
And for people right now, I know that, they're watching and they're saying, listen, this is some great work that you guys are doing in terms of really trying to help families out. But as we do know, there are some numbers that are rising, particularly with intimate partners and domestic violence. What are we hearing by way of like news stories and information? Because we also know, and we report about the increased number that we're seeing with regards to sex trafficking.
Right. So I think that it's just important to create a dialogue and for people to be more aware of potential signs. I mean, we've seen very recent news stories about human trafficking and the increased intimate partner violence with Gabby Petito and things like that. I think it's just to pay extra careful attention to signs that may arise that may be very subtle, but can go a long way if somebody recognizes that and tries to be a support system or somebody that a survivor can turn to in a time of need.
And so resources are very important. And I know that you're a very well accessible resource as well. But what other resources are out there to help families and individuals who may be suffering right now?
Right. So I am a lawyer, and our project primarily serves survivors who are in court, but Safe Horizon has an array of services, counseling services, mental health professionals that are equipped to deal with the trauma that a survivor goes through, community-based programs that also assist with safety planning and other referrals that can be useful to survivors. So we have a large array of services that we can provide. It's all dependent and very case-specific on what the survivor is looking for. But I encourage anyone who's not quite sure of what service they need or who they need to speak to really call our hotline. We have advocates who answer those calls and are able to directly place a survivor in contact with one of our appropriate programs.
Yeah. Well, Christine, thank you for the great work that you're doing, really helping families. As we said, your agency is the largest in terms of victim services and helping people out. More than 250,000 children, families, and adults serviced by your work. Thank you so much for sharing with us and giving us some intimate details about domestic violence.
Thank you so much, Daren.
All righty. Well, if you want more information, please visit their website at safehorizon.org and then also follow them on social media at Safe Horizon. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. Open continues coming up after the break.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
And welcome back. Legionnaire's disease is a severe form of pneumonia which can be very deadly. Our next guest successfully represented more than 24 people with related injuries in the Bronx 2015 Legionnaire's disease outbreak and has recently announced a notice of claim against New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation on behalf of a Harlem resident who contracted Legionnaire's disease this past August. Joining us now to share more details is principal attorney at the Catter Law Firm, Ronald J. Catter. And Ronald, good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, bring us up to speed. I mean, obviously, we talked about the case in the Bronx in 2015, but more recently in Harlem, as we continue to find these cases being more prevalent across New York City. For somebody who may not be so familiar, let's just first give them a background about Legionnaire's disease.
Of course, sure. That's a great place to start. Now, Legionnaire's disease is a bacterial illness. It's caused by the Legionella bacteria. People didn't know about it until about the 1970s, so it's been with us for about 50 years. And it got its name Legionnaire's disease because there was a convention in the city of Philadelphia at a hotel, Legion Association, which is a veterans group, and they were stricken with an unknown illness, bringing down dozens of their members who were staying at that hotel, and they didn't know what it was. They investigated it and tracked it to a particular bacteria, which got the name Legionella bacteria based on the American Legionnaires' presence in that hotel and being the source of the illness. Now, it turns out that Legionella bacteria is a naturally occurring bacteria. It's found in nature, it's found in streams, lakes, other natural bodies of water. But what happens in our urban environments, there are certain places where Legionella grows well beyond its natural amount, and it causes infection in city residents. So where if you were to counter it naturally, there would be a low level of the bacteria present. But unfortunately, in our urban environments, and because of the way the weather is in the summer, there's more occasion for it to accumulate.
And where I shared a little bit earlier in the lead, I talked a little bit about more than 24 bronchites really were affected with Legionnaire's disease. And then also you filed a notice of claim against the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Let's talk about that, the recent one in August. What's behind the notice of claim?
Okay, a notice of claim is a requisite for filing a case against a public authority, the city of New York, and other government-related entities. So the New York City Health and Hospitals is a public authority. They maintain the Harlem Hospital. And this summer, there were approximately 18 cases linked to the Harlem Hospital. And getting back to the causes of the illness, or if I can go back a step and say what the illness is, you mentioned that it's a pneumonia-like disease. And indeed, it's a disease that affects the lungs initially, but it can get, if it's not treated and addressed promptly, it can affect body organs, cause something called septic shock, which is a drop in blood pressure that affects the heart, lungs, kidneys. People can get kidney failure from it. And ultimately, about 10% of people who are diagnosed with Legionnaire's disease actually can die from it. There's also a group of people who are more susceptible to Legionnaire's disease. And I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, but there are people over 50, people who have chronic breathing conditions like asthma, COPD, people who are immunocompromised who may be receiving medications that affect their immune response. Smokers are also another large group of people who seem to get Legionella disease. So with the Bronx disease, with the Harlem outbreak, it was noted that people in particular zip codes were getting a higher than usual incidence of Legionnaire disease. And this is a mandatory reporting illness, which means that if a doctor detects Legionella disease, they must report it to the health department so that it can be tracked. And in this case, they observed that there was a high incidence of Legionella disease in several particular zip codes. The health department was able to test the water towers, the cooling towers. And that's also a misperception. It's not water towers, it's cooling towers at the Harlem Hospital to be the source, and found that that was the source of this outbreak.
So for a person right now that may be watching is this is new information to them, maybe they've been affected. What happens to a person if they've been affected by Legionnaire's disease? What's the legal recourse that's available to them?
Well, similar to other what they call negligence cases, as someone who permits Legionella to grow in their building without taking appropriate measures to stop it and decontaminate, and it spreads, they are responsible to people who get sick for allowing that to exist in the environment. You know, it's an environmental injury. You know, getting into a little more detail about it, if we could talk about the cooling towers, they're on tops of buildings and they disperse water vapor that contains Legionella, that could contain Legionella bacteria. And that is spread into the environment with the wind, with the hot air currents, and it can go through a neighborhood where the people are present, they're inhaling that into their lungs. And that's how the disease is transmitted. It's not a contagious disease from one person catching it from someone else, but it's something that's there are other incidences, and I can talk about those, but in this case, it appears that that was the case, that the cooling towers at the hospital were dispersing water vapor, which is invisible. We can't see it. As we speak, when we talk, we have water vapor coming out of our mouths, but you can't see it. In cold weather, you can see it when you have that mist in front of your face when you're talking. That's water vapor, but you're only seeing it because it's cold out. Usually we can't see water vapor. And the Legionella is so tiny that it's effectively breathe deeply into someone's lungs, and that's how they get sick. So for people who get sick, they can suffer severe illness. They may need to be put on a mechanical ventilator. They may be sedated and treated with strong antibiotics. And those injuries are compensable. They can get money for those if we can show who caused the outbreak.
Yeah, I got to get ready to go, but I want to ask you that question about that. How do you go about proving the negligence from your perspective as an attorney?
Well, with a large case like this, where the health department is tracking the source of it, they've got the proof. The science is there. They're able to actually match the illness, the Legionella bacteria in the patients, to the Legionella that's growing in the towers itself. And there's a strong evidence that that's the source of the illness. And we sue them. Ultimately, we'll sue them in court for civil damages and seek money compensation for the people who are hurt.
Well, Ronald, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for giving us the insight, and we'll continue to follow this story as it continues to unfold and develop. Ronald J. Catter, who is from the Catter Law Firm. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, if you want more information, visit the website, catterlaw.com, and then follow them on Facebook at Catter Law Firm. More show. We'll be back in a minute.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
And welcome back to the show. Vaccine hesitant New Yorkers are considering leaving the city as COVID mandates take effect. Now, some unvaccinated Bronx residents would rather pursue a life outside of New York City than actually be forced to take the vaccine. As of March, over 33,000 New Yorkers permanently relocated to Florida, which is up to 32% from the same period last year. Joining us now to share more details is the freelance reporter and master's candidate at the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, Bahar Ostadan. And thank you, Bahar, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, it's an interesting statistic, and when you really think about it, you say, okay, some people don't want to take the vaccine, got it. But to say that you're actually leaving the state of New York, that's some pretty interesting news.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, we've already seen an influx of New Yorkers moving to Florida, more so than usual throughout the pandemic, people seeking, looser COVID restrictions and wanting to send their kids to school in person as opposed to virtually. So we'll have to wait for the data to come in to see how many people actually did leave the city as a result of these mandates, not only to Florida, but to neighboring, Connecticut or Pennsylvania or other places that people might have family networks.
We know also that, Connecticut and the tri-state area, they really haven't adopted that policy as of yet. No telling as to whether or not they actually will. I know that you've done some reporting really specifically on this whole vaccine hesitancy issue. Tell us a little bit about what you found in your reporting.
Sure. So I think the fact that people are leaving is really indicative of a larger problem and a larger question of why people are hesitant to get the vaccine. So my approach was really just to talk to as many people as would speak to me, going door to door, where people are, laundromats, hair salons, lines, anywhere people are waiting and willing to talk, and just ask them, what are their thoughts around the vaccine? And if they're not vaccinated, what are the reasons for that? A few things surfaced in my interviews with people. I guess the first that is really troubling, especially someone who works in media, is people seem to be ingesting a lot of inaccurate information and regurgitating that to their network. So the rumors that we've been hearing about, the vaccine affecting fertility or the vaccine itself killing people, which we know are not accurate, are really prevalent in a lot of neighborhoods. And so that's really worrying people. And so that's causing people to actually fear the vaccine, I think, more than the virus itself, which is a big problem. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to combat that's going around.
So you would say there's a great spread of misinformation amongst the people that you're hearing when it comes to really details about the vaccine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what's unique about the Bronx in New York, as we know, is that this is a group of people, New Yorkers, the residents of the Bronx, that are really different from people in other parts of the country who are against the vaccine and also against the mask, and also, might be denying the virus itself. So that's not the group that we're talking about here. These are people that were really, really affected tragically by the virus. And most of the people that I interviewed actually have lost loved ones to COVID themselves. And even so, like I said, are more fearful of the vaccine than they are of the virus. And so I think there's a lot more reporting that needs to be done to unpack all of this. I think it would be really interesting to report on someone's journey from the day that the vaccines were actually released, and follow what was their decision making like, what information were they presented with, had they seen doctors, did they have access to people giving them accurate information, so that we can start to understand some of the shortcomings here in terms of medical systems and local government.
I found there's an interesting statistic as it pertains to the Bronx. When you talk about Bronxites and those who actually with boots on the ground, who are residents of the Bronx, a lot of people who actually live in the borough of the Bronx are actually essential workers. And when you talk about this vaccine hesitancy, you're looking at essential workers per se, who are saying, even though we're on the front lines, we still have some hesitancy here.
Absolutely. I think that question too drives us to the question of who had access to the vaccine when it was first released. And some essential workers did for that reason, but a lot of people couldn't take time off of work to get the vaccine, to recover from the vaccine. They didn't have the medical benefits or the technological infrastructure to go and find those appointments and the time to sit and scroll and hunt for the appointments the way that a lot of other New Yorkers had the privilege to do. And so I think it begs the question of sort of how does access drive hesitancy? And that's something that I don't think has been addressed so deeply in the mainstream media. I think there's, you see a lot of mainstream outlets pointing to historical medical harms like the Tuskegee experiment, and sort of evading the present day medical harms and the present day shortcomings, and how a lot of neighborhoods in the Bronx are really medically under-resourced in terms of even number of general practitioners.
So where does your reporting take you from here? Obviously, these are some very key statistics, and startling in some ways when you look at the fact that a lot of people, and you say 32% more than actually this time last year, are heading particularly to Florida. Where does your work take you next?
Yeah, I have the same question myself. I've been trying to keep in touch with the people that I interviewed and just check in with them. Hey, have you decided to leave? Some of the people that I interviewed did, in fact, they chose to stay unvaccinated and lose their jobs. A lot of them are trying to start sort of small businesses at home with, graphic design and other things that they can do remotely. But I definitely will continue to try to talk to as many people as I can, like you said, with boots on the ground, because, I think it's sort of a dangerous situation when, as we know, the Bronx, at least in terms of national media and even New York City wide publications, is a really undercovered borough. And the danger of that is that when it is covered, the way in which it's covered carries a lot more weight. And so I think as much as I can, and as much as we can as reporters, to talk to as many people and represent, how people are really feeling is important to getting the truth out.
Yeah. Well, Bahar, Ostadan, thank you so much for being with us, sharing some very vital information. Of course, we too will continue to follow the story. We'll probably get you back here to give us some more details if you have some more findings. But thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
No worries. And listen, if you want to find out more information about her work, please go to her website, baharostadan.com. I want you to stay with us. We got more show coming up. Open continues right after this. And welcome back. Magnesium deficiency is a widespread health problem. Magnesium influences more than 300 biochemical reactions in the body, including blood sugar, blood pressure, and energy production. However, a majority of Americans aren't getting enough magnesium from their diet, and experts believe a majority of Americans are living in a deficiency without obvious symptoms yet. Joining us to share a little bit more details is the plant-based nutrition health coach and owner of CB Health and Wellness, Dr. Cecilia Basbus. And Dr. Basbus, good to have you.
Hi, how are you, Daren? Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. And yeah, so when we talk about magnesium deficiency, I think the lead says pretty much that a lot of people are deficient, but sometimes don't even know it yet.
Exactly, yes. I mean, usually like the deficiency comes because you have a low amount of foods that give you magnesium, or you have problems in the absorption of the magnesium. It could be for different causes. It could be if you're a diabetic type 2, if you have celiac or Crohn's disease, or some kind of absorption problem, some genetics diseases. If you drink a lot of alcohol, that can also give you a magnesium deficiency. If you're pregnant, and if you take, for example, antibiotics, or if you take diuretics when you have high blood pressure and stuff like that, yeah, all those can give you a magnesium deficiency.
So walk us through a little bit about if somebody's out there right now and they're saying, listen, I'm wondering whether or not I'm actually magnesium deficient. What would be some of the telltale signs?
So usually the signs are loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, cramping. Also, it can give you tingling on your extremities. You can have seizures. It can have also mood changes. And if it gets if it gets worse, you can also have problems in in your heart, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, and yeah, that's kind of it. I mean,
yeah. So obviously, a lot to consider. So if a person is deficient, what are some of the things that he or she may be able to do in order to improve their deficiency?
A lot of doctors will give you some supplements just to make it easier, but I mean, it could easily be fixed if you have a good diet. So high amounts of magnesium come from nuts, for example, almonds, cashews, walnuts, peanut butter. All the peanuts have high amounts of magnesium, or all the greens, for example, kale, collard greens, spinach, all of the black beans, all the beans in general, but especially black beans are the ones that have high amounts of magnesium. Also, for example, whole wheat also gives you high amounts of magnesium. Rice, potatoes, avocado, but those you have to be really careful if you have diabetes type 2, because it also increases the amount of sugar in your body. And for example, what else? The cereals I said. Oh, and if you eat meats, fish, fatty fish can also give you high amounts of magnesium, and chicken breasts.
So when we talk,
but yes.
Yeah. And it causes this inflammation in the body. Can you give us a little bit more about how that inflammation actually affects people?
So first of all, you have to understand that inflammation comes from certain foods, right? For example, all the refined carbohydrates, for example, your breads and pastry gives you a high amount of inflammation. Highest amount of sugar gives you inflammation. Alcohol gives you inflammation. Dairy gives you inflammation, and all the meats gives you inflammation. So, I mean, you would think, wow, there's nothing else I can eat, but there's still there's a lot of things that you can still eat. Those they give inflammation in your stomach, for example, you have bloating, your intestine will get all swollen. It also helps when it gets worse when you have arthritis or osteoporosis. So you have a lot of pain in your joints. So how do we improve this? Simple. You have to eliminate all the animal products, right? All the red meats and processed meats, also the dairies and alcohol and sugary drinks, right? But if you have a diet that has high amounts of greens, like the other one, when you want to have magnesium, right? All the leafy greens, kale, spinach, collard greens. And then if you have beans and high amount of beans, and if you have also your nuts, also helps with inflammation. Anything that have omega-3s and 6, for example, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds. Those help also with inflammation because those reduce inflammation. And also fish because they have high amounts of omegas.
So you've got somebody out there watching right now saying, listen, I want to know more about this. How do I go about finding out what's the process and finding out what my magnesium levels are?
So I would definitely like have a consultation with your doctor and have, I would definitely have like a blood test to see what are your amounts of magnesium, because it also has to be related. I mean, if you have a blood test, they would see the amount of magnesium, and also if you have your calcium and potassium is low, because low amount of magnesium also affects those. So you have to like see all your blood levels to see what's going on. Yeah, basically a blood test.
Is there a gender that is more specific when it comes to having this magnesium deficiency, male, female?
Not really, because I mean, absorption, it comes, a lower absorption in magnesium comes in older age. And if you have problems in absorbing magnesium, right? And those come, like I said before, like when you have chronic, like Crohn's disease, like celiac disease, if you're diabetic, so those affect any gender. There's no specific gender or race that would affect more.
Yeah, and so we see a lot in stores, particularly drugstores, those magnesium pills. How effective are they in terms of improving one's health?
I mean, magnesium, like it will, like all the supplements will be, it will be great. But the thing is, like I always say the same thing: if you don't have a good and balanced diet, it doesn't matter how much things you ingest and like supplements you ingest. If you're drinking alcohol or if you have other issues that are going to cause the less absorption and excretion of magnesium, right? So you will be drinking the supplement, but then you have these other things that are going to make it worse. So you have to fix some of the problems and then have a good diet and balanced diet to like improve the symptoms.
So really the best way to do it is having a better diet is the best way to really conquering this issue.
Exactly. Simple as that. A good diet, you have a happy life.
Sounds so simple, but so hard for so many people. Dr. Cecilia Basbus, thank you so much for joining us here on Open and letting us know about the magnesium deficiency.
You're welcome. It's always great to talk with you and to be able to show a little bit of all my knowledge. I mean, not that I have a lot of knowledge, but like to show my knowledge to all the people that I have.
Yeah, you bring a lot to the table. Thank you, Dr. Cecilia. And I know the magnesium deficiency affects a lot of people, and certainly glad that you're able to give us this information to help a lot of our Bronxites and people across New York City become more familiar, more aware. Thanks so much. Now, if you want more information, please call 647-2584 and visit her website at CeciliaBasbus.com. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. Open continues right after this. And welcome back. Jobs First NYC is a not-for-profit organization creating and advancing solutions, breaking down barriers, and transforming the system supporting young adults and their communities in the pursuit of economic opportunities. Joining us now and sharing more details is the president and CEO of Jobs First NYC, Marjorie Parker. And Marjorie, good to have you.
Thank you, Daren, for inviting me to open in this conversation with you. Much appreciated.
Oh, glad to have you. And so please acquaint our viewers just a little bit more with Jobs First NYC and the work that you do.
Absolutely. You know, Jobs First NYC was born out of a crisis 16 years ago. What we faced back then, as we are doing today, was a crisis of young adults where high numbers of young adults were out of work and out of school between the ages of 18 and 24. We were founded through a collaborative community process with stakeholder meetings across the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan. And you know, our mission is to create and advance solutions that break down barriers and transform the systems supporting young adults and the communities where they live. The way that we do our work, we work with about 160 partners across New York City, high schools, employers, private philanthropy, intermediaries, government, universities. We focus our solutions across 3 areas of work. We look at communities that have high numbers of young people who are out of work and out of school. So we want to respond to the unique needs of each community. Sometimes the conditions are the same, but the solutions are different. We look at education as an avenue for this for young people. So we look at what are the post-secondary opportunities and career pathways we should be looking at, and how do we make sure that we stem the inflow of young people who are leaving high school without connection to the next opportunity. And then we work with nonprofits and employers to identify, design, and advance kind of the practices and policies that we think can get to better outcomes for young people in the communities where they live. And so using what we learn across community, across education, across work, we focus on what are the policy solutions that we should be advocating for that could support the practices on the ground in local communities, across education, and across work and employment that can produce better results for young people. We really use a very disciplined, repeatable process to identify the challenges and incubate new solutions. And when those work, Daren, we then implement and advance those, and then we seek further investment into it.
Yeah.
So that process it takes time, and you have to pay for time. Often, folks who invest in developing solutions don't want to pay for long processes. But our process is really driven by our core values that centers community and stakeholders and ensure that their voices steer collaborative efforts and solutions.
Well, give me a little bit about the pandemic, because we know that the pandemic has had a huge effect on the workforce. What can you tell us about how the pandemic has affected the workforce and the people that you represent?
So, at the height of the pandemic, we had close to 400,000 young people who were out of work and out of school. So this was ages 16 to 24, right? So this was last August. By the time we got to the end of 2020, that number was 180,000. Now that may seem reasonable, and you think that this is pandemic in fact impacted, so those numbers are going down. But to give you some context, when we were launched, the numbers were pretty high. By 2010, right after the greatest recession, those numbers were up to about 187,000. By 2019, those numbers were down to 106,000. What happened during the pandemic at end of 2020, we're back at 180,000. So that's an 80% increase over what we had in 2019. And so that's about 27% of the population. So that is pretty significant. The challenge for young workers is, what we learned after the Great Recession, and certainly you cannot necessarily compare the COVID-19 pandemic to the 2018 recession, which wasn't worldwide and primarily impacted the United States. Young people are left at the back of the line, right? They have less experience. A lot of small employers where they usually get their first experience closed down during the pandemic, and an estimated 20% of small employers are not going to come back. That number could be higher. So in the places where young people usually get their first work experiences, that number has shrunk. In the places, some of the other places like Burger King and McDonald's, where they usually get some of those secondary experiences, what we found after the 2008 recession was that the workers, the age of workers ticked up. So those places were hiring older and more experienced workers. So we think that going into a post-pandemic, if we can call it that, economic recovery, is that we really need to focus on what needs to happen for young adults. And that's what led us to really convene 100 plus nonprofit organization workforce, intermediaries and employers over 7 months to really think through what should we be doing for young people.
Yeah, and I want to come back and maybe we'll have you back to talk a little bit more about the report that was released, but share with us a little bit more about how people can get connected and what can people do to get connected to the work that you're doing.
So, through the report, Daren, which is called Equitable Recovery for Young Adults, an agenda for New York City workforce development, folks can go on our website and look up that report. It has 7 key recommendations, right? It's asking for $100 million in investment in bridge programming. It's asking for $150 million for sectoral employment training, which produced good results for young adults. It's asking for $357 million investment for subsidized employment, which young people will need, $105 million for post-secondary education. Almost 30% of young people leave high school without a plan, right? We want them to leave with a plan. And then we're asking for $58 million for capacity building. We're asking folks to go look at this report, share it with your legislators. It has shows up in your agencies that you work with your legislators who are making policies, and in your local community. The Bronx, for example, Daren, where you are, 37% of young people 18 to 24-year-old are out of work and out of school.
Amazing numbers there. We got to get that. Well, I should say we have to make this better. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Certainly the unemployment rate, huge in the borough of the Bronx. And I know that you're boots on the ground trying to make things better, particularly for young adults as well. Got to have you back and share more. Marjorie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Daren. Appreciate it.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Well, if you want more information, visit the website at JobsFirstNYC.org. And of course, don't forget about them on social media at JobsFirstNYC. Well, we come to the end of our show today. We want to thank all of our guests for joining us, but most of all, you, the viewer, for tuning in. And if you missed any part of today's show, you can catch Recablecast on BronxNet Channel 67. Also, if you have Verizon Files, that'd be Channel 2133, and anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. Again, a special shout out to all of our viewers on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, as Open is being broadcast live simultaneously on the MNN channel. Now, if you want a brand new episode of Open, come back on Friday morning. My girl, Rena Valentine, she'll bring you the best of arts and entertainment and keep you up to date. Until then, I am Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless. Most of all, keep this channel wide open. Thank you for watching Open Wednesday. God willing, we'll see you next week.